Hey guys, this is Matt from Amateur Filmies, and in today's video I'll be talking to you about 5 movies from the Criterion Collection that I recommend all of you check out at some stage. So as a lot of you collectors know, November is the big month to get a lot of Criterion titles that you've been wanting to pick up because it is the month where Barnes & Noble hosts their 50% off sale, and that usually translates over to other sites like Amazon as well. In all fairness, this is a pretty late video to be making given that the sale is only running for another few more days, but of course Criterion Collection titles go on sale every single year, so whether or not you're picking something up really last minute during this sale or you're looking for future recommendations, hopefully I have some interesting titles to talk to you about. Now with these 5 recommendations, I just want to also say that they are very different from one another. I've chosen them for different specific reasons, but one reason being, of course, that I really love these movies, but 2, I wanted to show off the sort of diversity of the Criterion Collection catalog. Like, there is so many different types of films out there in their catalog that are really worth checking out, and I feel like the 5 that I've chosen here do a decent job of showing you how versatile they are as a company, so I just wanted to mention that as well. Now this first recommendation is definitely one of their more popular titles. I see this movie get talked about quite a lot, and I wanted to be one of the other ones that recommended it to you guys as well, because if you haven't seen it, it is definitely worth a try, and that is House. How do I even begin to describe this movie? This is a Japanese movie that came out in 1977, and it is like a surrealist black horror comedy. But even that sort of very description isn't going to sum up the kind of things that you see in this movie. This is one of the most memorable experiences I've ever had watching a movie, and it's basically about a bunch of schoolgirls who go away on, I think, like a post-school vacation sort of thing. They go to one of the main characters' auntie's house. Once they get there, it just all hell sort of breaks loose, but in the most whimsical, fantastical kinds of ways. It's going to be very hard for me to explain the types of things that go on in this movie, but you're just going to have to trust me that this film is absolutely amazing. This film clocks in at 88 minutes, but that flies by because you soon go from thinking you're just watching a movie to just being absolutely perplexed and amused by these crazy images and scenes that are happening on screen. It almost feels like a drug experience, I have to say, and I reference that because I remember I was watching a Criterion Collection Closet video, and someone picked up this movie and said that it's like doing acid without having to do acid. And I think that is a very good way to describe the experience of watching this movie. If you decide to take the plunge on this movie based on my recommendation, you'll be treated to awesome scenes such as a floating head that is flying around, attacking people, a piano that eats someone, and even a guy that just disintegrates into a pile of bones while screaming about the fact that all his bananas were eaten. I mean, if that doesn't sell you on the movie, I don't know what will. But in all honesty, just the crazy mix of tone in this film and just the wacky, cool, zany effects, the melodramatic acting at points, just there's so much here, so much things in this movie that I can praise, and I really urge you to check out this movie if you haven't already. The next movie I'll be recommending is Midnight Cowboy. So Midnight Cowboy is definitely a lot different to House, although most things are, to be fair, let's be honest, but this film came out in 1969 and stars Jon Voight and Dustin Hoffman in probably one of the best acting performances that I've seen from either of them. This film is about a character named Joe Buck, who's played by Jon Voight, and he is from Texas. He's like a Texas cowboy type of character, and he decides that he wants to travel to New York to try and get lucky with a rich New York lady who will pamper him and give him money. Basically, he wants to be a hustler. He gets to New York and he starts bumping into various people, one of whom is Dustin Hoffman, who plays the role of Rico, or Ratso as he's commonly nicknamed, who plays a type of scam artist, someone who pickpockets and steals from a lot of different people. And the rest of the movie is basically a character study of these two people as they try and find their place in the world and some of the struggles that they have as they try and navigate the New York life and just their own lives in general. I really must emphasize that this movie does place a lot of importance on the character study aspect. There's not going to be heaps of big events that happen throughout the entire story. It's definitely more of an examination of these two characters as they respond to things that happen around them as they try and live their lives. But the thing that makes this a very compelling movie is the nuance that these two actors bring to their performances. And you end up having a lot of empathy and understanding and sympathy for these characters. The editing in this, I thought was a little bit jarring at first, but it is a really great tool for them to sort of communicate the character's past as well. We sort of get snippets of Jon Voight's character's past and how that has contributed to his attitude and his emotional state, which I thought was done really, really well. Another aspect of this film that I really enjoyed was how New York itself was portrayed. I'm not the most knowledgeable about how New York itself has evolved over the course of the 20th century, but I really enjoyed how they tackled the culture of New York, whether or not that was portrayed in the party scenes or the street life. I just found that really interesting to watch. But yeah, at the end of the day, this is just a really, really solid character study of two troubled people and is just a really emotional journey, and I really highly recommend that you check it out. So my third recommendation for today is a horror classic that came out in 1973, and that is Nicholas Roeg's Don't Look Now. This film stars Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie, who play a couple, and basically after they experience a family tragedy, they go on a trip to Venice, where Donald Sutherland's character is working on restoring a church, or like a church's artifact or something like that. But basically the entire movie is an examination of grief and tragedy and how these two things can impact one's own emotional state and well-being, but also their relationships with other people. So one of the big reasons why I wanted to talk about Don't Look Now specifically in this recommendations video is I wanted the chance to talk about how, in my opinion, this is very reminiscent of the giallo subgenre of horror, which I'm a massive fan of. There are a lot of specific characteristics that make up, or are at least very commonly found in your typical giallo film. So I was very pleasantly surprised as a giallo film fan to see a lot of those elements incorporated into Don't Look Now. For one, we've got the Italian setting in Venice, we've got a psychic character, there's some supernatural undertones and even an underlying murder plot. But most interestingly to me is the fact that our main characters, they're from England, so they're actually foreigners to the setting of Italy, which is really essential in how the film deals with the theme of isolation. Not only are they literally isolated from their home in Venice, but there are a lot of cultural and language barriers between the main characters and the citizens of Venice that sort of cause for a lot of anxious and tense moments in the film. And to take this a step further, in this film there is a combination of both English and Italian dialogue, and you'll notice when watching this that a lot of the Italian dialogue doesn't come with English subtitles. I actually thought there was a manufacturing error with this release, but it turns out that it's actually a stylistic choice by the director himself. And while I haven't done any research, into what his motives for doing that might be, if I had to personally guess, it would be, as I've already mentioned, to drive home that isolating aspect, to really highlight the language and cultural barriers between the main characters and the other people who live in Venice. There is a lot to unpack in the story of this movie, and I have to admit the very first time that I watched this, I don't know if I wasn't paying enough attention or whatnot, but I remember I walked away from this film a little bit confused. But if you watch this film with a very attentive eye and be open to some supernatural elements being present within the film, there is a lot to say about how good this story is written, and most importantly, it is communicated through masterful editing techniques, I will say. Very, very awesome film. If you like your horror films and you haven't checked this one out, I highly recommend it. It's a very good movie. So my fourth recommendation for today is John Waters' film Polyester. Now, I do want to acknowledge that not everyone is a fan of John Waters' films, and I would totally understand it if you said that you really didn't like this movie, but there are a few different reasons why I still wanted to put it in this recommendations video. Now, I'm very new to John Waters' films in general, so maybe what I'm about to talk about is present in a lot of his other works, but one thing that I really appreciated about this movie was how John Waters incorporated melodrama as a core aspect of this film. There are a lot of crazily overacted performances in this movie, and it leads to a lot of very humorous situations in the film. With that said, some people may find the over-exaggerated, overacted melodrama feature of Polyester to be a little bit grating, and I would totally understand that if it's not your thing, but it is for me, which is why I'm recommending it. If this film didn't sound zany enough for you, maybe this will sell you on it. So included in this release is the Odorama card. And basically, when you're watching this movie, you can see all the numbers there. When you're watching this movie, there will be certain scenes where a number will start flashing in the bottom corner of your screen. And basically, it's asking you to scratch the corresponding number and sniff it, which is adding an extra sensory experience to the film. It is very gross, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that I really love this feature of the film, because it really, the fact that it can incorporate a type of audience participation in this way, I just think is absolutely awesome. And it reminds me of the William Castle films from the 50s and 60s, where he would incorporate a type of gimmick into his films. It really reminds me of that. And as I said, while it is quite gross and maybe a little bit nauseous at times, this sort of immersive experience I thought really drove home that entertaining sort of experience. I really loved that aspect of it. In summing up my thoughts on Polyester, I would say that I'm not recommending it because I think it's some brilliant film. I did enjoy it, and I'm sure a lot of you will too, but I'm also sure that a lot of you won't enjoy it. But I just wanted to recommend it because, one, the release by Criterion is awesome, but two, it's just a different film than what I'm used to seeing. I love seeing how John Waters has tackled melodrama, as I've already said a bunch of times, but it's just an interesting, fun, wacky movie, and it definitely makes me want to check out all of his other films as well, which I'm really looking forward to doing. So my last recommendation for today's video is Yasujiro Ozu's Tokyo Story. Ozu is known for constructing a lot of films about family life, family relationships and family dynamics, and That is definitely the case with Tokyo Story. Basically, it's about an aging couple who decide to travel to Tokyo to visit their children who are now all grown up, and they find that there seems to be a type of disconnect between themselves and the children. One thing that you'll immediately notice when watching Tokyo Story is that it is very deliberately slowly paced, and that a lot of time is given to very mundane actions and events that normally might be glossed over in a different film. Things like pouring liquid into a glass, or like walking into a room and sitting down. Things like that are given just as much time as anything else. So some people might find that this is moving a little bit too slowly for them. But if you stick it out, you'll actually find that the story transforms into something very compelling, very interesting, and very relatable in a lot of ways as well. I remember reading that people tend to perceive or relate to this movie in different ways as they go through various stages of their lives. Like, how I feel about it now in my 20s may be different to how I perceive the film in, say, my 60s in the future when I decide to rewatch this. And I can definitely see the film's capacity to do that for different people. I've only watched Tokyo Story the once, so I possibly could be misreading this, but the impression I got when I was watching was that, the film came out in 1953 and it's set in post-war Japan. And it seemed like Ozu was commenting on the increasing westernization of Japanese society and how this can sometimes create conflicts with sort of more traditional Japanese customs. And this commentary is reflected through his examination of family lives and the family dynamic. And while I wasn't necessarily thinking about the historical and cultural context of post-war Japan the first time that I was watching this movie, I am going to keep it in the back of my mind moving forward, because it really does show you how multi-layered Ozu's story is and how nuanced it is as well. I did also want to mention regarding the cinematography, I don't know if this is the same case in his other films, but in this particular one, Ozu utilizes a lot of really low shots and a lot of static shots. The camera doesn't really move a lot in this film. It does contribute to the sort of slow moving pace of the film, but I really like it because you can sort of really focus on what is actually happening within the frame. More attention is given to sort of subtle movements and all that kind of stuff. So it is a really unique take on how to actually frame the story, literally speaking. If you haven't seen Tokyo Story, I really highly recommend that you give it a try, because there's such a wonderfully crafted emotional journey, and I really think you should watch it. So that brings us to the end of this recommendations video. Thank you very much for watching. If you haven't seen these films before, hopefully I've sold you on them. I've got a couple of days left of the Barnes & Noble sale, so make sure you get busy buying. But of course, there's going to be future sales, so maybe you can pick them up then as well. But if you have seen these films, I'd love to hear what you think about them and talk to you in the comments. These are all films that I love in some type of way, obviously, as I've talked about in this video, but it's always great talking to you guys as well. So let me know what you think. Just want to quickly say as well that if you enjoyed this video and you like movie collecting or just talking about films in general, feel free to like the video and subscribe to our channel. It would mean a lot to both Sarah and I. We put out a lot of videos that are similar to this, and we should have one out relatively soon as well after this one. So thanks again for watching this video. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you in the next one.